your resting heart rate and my resting heart rate are probably different. And what is the norm for you and what's the norm for me? And when that goes off a norm, that's when you need some kind of action. So that's one kind of a use case where I think there's going to be more and more of the analytics that's being done on the edge, and we're seeing that today.
Welcome to Coffee with Mr IoT. My name is Robert Schmidt, also known as Mr IoT. I am Deloitte's Chief IoT Technologist, and today my guest is Ashish Parikh from Arrow. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
You are Vice President, and you spend all your work time with Internet of Things, don't you?
I do. It's been about a 4-year journey thinking about IoT, and it's been great.
I always have to say it's one of those things, when I think about how long I've been in IoT, which is about the same amount of time.
Yeah.
But then I meet some people who have done M2M, machine to machine.
Right.
They always laugh at me because they're like, oh, we've done this 15 years ago.
Yeah.
What's changed? What's new today?
It's a good question. I think the sensing technologies have changed, the network technologies have changed, the battery technologies have changed, the price points have come down, so it's become a lot more ubiquitous, a lot more accessible. So it was
the cloud,
the analytics, the edge. We can't have a conversation about IoT in 2019 without talking about the edge.
Are we going to talk about fog too?
Fog, edge. It depends on which side of the bay you're coming from, but really the impact of edge computing on the different types of use cases out there, autonomous machines, I think is really going to be fascinating, right? When you think of autonomous machines, everyone goes directly to self-driving cars, and that obviously is a great use case of technology. But there's so many other use cases around autonomous machines. Last mile delivery, right? Think of mining, construction, where you need autonomous machines in high-risk areas. And it's not just about the compute, it's about the sensing around it, it's about the communication, it's about the updates, because all these things always need to be updated. And that's really the fascinating part of where the technology is going to go in 2019 as we move forward here.
I have to pick up on one of the things you talked about, which is not quite self-driving, but it's also, we talked about drones.
Yeah.
And I just watched this fascinating video where there's these teeny tiny drones. They're called tiny whoops, actually.
Yep.
And they actually had a use case which I'd never thought of, but the police used the tiny whoops to fly through HVAC equipment to actually check if everything was okay before they had important people go in. And I was really blown away by this, that you can use drones in such fascinating ways. These are these first-person view things.
Yeah, it's fascinating. It's amazing what we learn from our kids now. I have a 15-year-old who's very passionate about drones, and he sits in the living room with his FPV goggles on, and he flies that tiny whoop around, and it's just buzzing by me as I'm walking around doing something. It's a lot of fun for him.
Do you fly one?
I don't. I've tried to fly one, and I am like a nervous Nelly when it comes to flying for some reason. And I remember 3 years ago when he started, and we were both in the park, and he was learning, and that thing came crashing down in the first 5 seconds, and he was like, "Oh my God, I don't think I can do this." And today he's flying this thing. He's designing his own drones, and it's just a lot of fun. So, but I think that use case is interesting because I've also heard of police in Denver area that are using drone technology to really look at a crash scene on a freeway. So if you're in Denver, I-25 is a pretty major corridor, and what the city is and the police officers are doing is using drones to map out the entire area after a crash, and they're able to clear the crash much faster than they would have been if they were doing it the old-fashioned way. So instead of taking hours, it can be minutes. And that's really, again, a great use case. I hadn't thought of the tiny whoop through the I think that's really incredible. I hadn't even thought of that.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
Yeah.
I think the thing about drones too is that now what happens is there's so many sensors on the drone, and it really almost like Internet of Things and drones become sort of intermingled. It's just another way, particularly with all the visual, all the analytics that we can do on video now. And so
Absolutely.
forth. So I'd like to sort of talk a little bit about what does Aero do. Maybe you can help us a little bit introduce to Aero as a company.
Yeah.
And then give us one customer story that you really are fascinated by that you've been working on. I know you work a lot with Indigo and so forth, so there must be some really awesome stories to talk about.
Yeah, there's so many stories. Let me start with Aero Electronics and who we are, and I think I'll start with it's the biggest company that most people have never heard of. We always get the, what do you do? Are you trucking? And it's like, okay, let's step back. We're an 83-year-old company. We were founded in really the heart of Manhattan, where the World Trade Center once stood, and started off in radio kits. And really, the company has evolved over the last 83 years into a technology services company. And so distribution is a core competency for us. We have a large part of our business that's in the electronics distribution, all the components that you need to go build those devices, right? All the customers we have, and we are here for our customers. We're helping them build their products. You won't find our brand on a product out there because that's not who we are. We're here to serve our customers. So that's
So what's a product that I wouldn't know you built that I probably use?
You know, I'll give you an example of a customer that we helped enable when there were 4 people in a garage, and it's the company called Ring, the Ring doorbell. Right? So when Jamie and his initial founders were kind of thinking about this idea, our sales teams went down there and they started talking, and they're like, we think there's something interesting here. And really it kind of started from that into, you know, a really great relationship over the years into, you know, 12 months or so ago, they're
Acquired by Amazon.
they were acquired by Amazon. And so, again, I think that's a great both customer and a great IoT use case. And now you're seeing that camera-based technology, and there's a lot of things happening in that space around cameras, whether it's in retail and retail analytics, where there's great demand to get better insight. Retail is a great sort of place to talk about for a second. When you think of retail organizations today, right? If you're on their website, you have all the information you need because the website is instrumented. You know when you're being tracked 100% of the time. Unfortunately, it's true.
Unfortunately, the stock still isn't true,
Yeah.
as I found out over Christmas.
Yeah, but then you go to the contact center, the other touch point. And again, there's a lot of analytics, right? Mm-hmm. That industry has matured and there's a lot more insight into customers. When you walk in the door, they don't know who you are, you know, what's your customer lifetime value or anything like that. So you're completely anonymous. They have very little insight into who's buying their products, who's not buying their products, what's the age, the gender, where are they lingering. And I think these are some of the areas where camera-based technologies really are going to be critical for retailers to get better insight into planograms, into product placement, into really understanding the analytics around which kind of customers are buying products, age, gender, things like that.
So you're the VP of IoT platforms and marketing, as far as I understand. And you talked about Ring, which is a great example.
Yeah.
It's the doorbell
Yeah.
that you ring on, and it not just goes and rings the bell, but actually has a camera on it.
Yep.
So you can interact through a phone
Yep.
with the person that rings your doorbell. And I travel a lot, so for me this is great.
Yeah.
You know, when Amazon comes, I know there's a package for me. one of the things I always say is IoT is a team sport.
Yep.
And we all got to work together. Everybody has their part.
Absolutely.
So which part does Aero do? We talk, everybody has a platform. So where do you come in? Which part do you talk about?
Yeah, that's a great question. And you know, I realized that we kind of went on a segue, and I never finished the first question you asked me is, who is Aero? Because I only talk about one part, but I'll get back to that. So to answer the question around Ring, really we help them with identifying the right components for their solution. We actually had one of our engineering services partners, and like you said, it's a team sport. We're not doing everything ourselves, but we've identified and vetted the right ecosystem partners, both from a technology perspective, from a service perspective, and we help them with the initial design. Our field application engineers have great insight into the kind of components. We have great insight into the life cycle of components, and that's important for somebody building products. There's a lot of, there's the OT part of IoT and the IT part of IoT, and a lot of people focus on the IT part. Really, there's a lot of value that you get from those devices, but the devices are hard, and that's really an area of focus for us, is how do we help them build a product, it's manufacturable, the parts that you use aren't going to go end of life. You're not going to be supply constrained. A lot of people don't think about these things, and Aero is really, really good at that. So we help with a lot of those areas for customers like Ring. I want to go back to kind of explain the other part of Aero, which is important because one is we help customers, like that to go build products, right? There are direct customers. We're helping them go build something. It doesn't say Ring by Aero or anything like that. That's not who we are. We're there to basically enable their success. The other part of Aero is really our indirect channel, the system integrators and the value-added resellers, where we're selling things that are in the compute stack, so server, storage, networking, applications, premise or cloud-based. And as we look at that, all those SIs are the ones who have relationships with the end customers. They understand the use cases, they understand the integrations that need to happen. But where they struggle is with the OT side, the devices, the hardware. And when you start talking about the protocol soup that is out there on the edge and the device management, and their eyes glaze over. And so this is where really Aero can help, because we can abstract a lot of that complexity and make it available to those SIs and more. So that's really sort of the two parts of Aero that I wanted to touch on.
So hardware's hard, right?
Hardware is hard.
One of the things, when I think of hardware, that's really a key component too, is we actually moving compute and intelligence and data very close to the user. What does that mean for security? How do you think about security? What do you do in order to create devices? You talked about end of life. I think of what firmware is on there, and how do you how do you deal with that?
So I want to talk about security really through the entire life cycle. And yeah, security is critical. It's harder to manage the devices on the edge. It's harder to think about the corner cases of the breaches. And so when you start thinking about security, it can be an afterthought. It's got to be designed in from the very beginning. How is the board secured? How is the silicon secured? What are the supply chain considerations around security? And then how are you going to go program the keys so that they're never exposed? And that if anybody actually tries to tamper with the device, it actually basically cuts off the device, if you will. And from there, you then get into the encryption, right? As it moves from the device up the IP stack into, a platform for analysis. At the application layer, you need the security. At the gateway level, you're running Linux, Windows, something, and you need to think about security there. And so again, these are all the places where you're thinking about security. And then you get to the end of life cycle, which is what happens when you're done with the device. Are you just going to go put it in a bin? But guess what? It has some data that you may want to think about. And this is, again, a big part of security that people don't think of is what is the right way to go dispose of that device at the end of life cycle. And Arrow basically has products and services really from that inception of how you go provision and design a secure device up through the communications, the network, and up into and at the end of life at the disposition edge.
I have this, we were just doing an event, and one of the things was I asked the audience, everybody, to think about as part of the introduction, how many connected devices or Internet of Things they have at home. And it took me actually a while to think about how many I had. I came up with about, I think it was 42 or 43, which blew my mind. And it was actually not easy to really figure out how many I had. How many do you have, you think?
Probably in the 25 or so range. And you know, I'm counting both sort of the house and our cabin up in the mountains where, you know, again, it becomes critical to understand it's, you know, I think it's probably below freezing in the cabin right now. So we need to make sure the pipes are off, the heat is off, and again, the cabin's safe. But yeah, I think we're adding more and more. But I'll tell you, one of the challenges I see there is the walled gardens, right? Off your 42 devices, how many apps do you have to control the 42 devices?
So that's a great question. So when you say walled gardens, you mean that individual providers kind of give you in there, that's their walled garden, right?
Correct.
So if you start with Alexa, you kind of walled off with Amazon. If you go with Hey Google, you're walled off with Google and Nest and so forth.
Yeah.
So I have probably 1, 2, 3, 4 apps.
Okay.
And I made a conscious choice to really standardize on one ecosystem for most of my house stuff.
Sure.
And then I added a hub that I tried to have talk to everything.
Yeah.
By the way, I just found out that I got this really fancy remote and it doesn't work with my hub, which really upset me, so I sent the remote back. And then I have one system that's specifically for my sprinklers.
Yeah.
And then unfortunately my fridge uses its own little thing.
Yeah.
And by the way, that was, for me, the least useful IoT device I got was the fridge. I really thought I'd use it and I don't.
Yeah.
And I have to tell you, the sprinkler somehow really fascinates me. Sort of like this idea that you combine weather data with what goes on, and then they have a flow meter on it. It's really, really well done. So very fascinating.
Yeah, and you know, I think on that point, I think if you kind of take your home sprinkler system and extend that into agriculture at scale, and this notion of precision agriculture, and how do you water only when necessary, whether it's based on, you know, external weather data or moisture data from the ground, to kind of say, hey, how am I going to do this? Or if you're doing indoor agriculture, and that's obviously on the rise, legally in many states now. I think there's tremendous opportunity there.
You don't come from Colorado, do you?
I come from California, but it's the same now.
So I think this brings me great to my final topic for today, which is edge. And you kind of, we joked about edge, fog, and so forth. What do you see going, where do you see this going there? What's your thought? Where's this going to go? For me, I think fog, I wish there'd be more. I think we have so much compute power around us now that actually doesn't talk to each other and doesn't get leveraged. So one of my dreams for the next 5 years is that fog really brings it together. But where do you see edge? Where's Era going with this? And I know we just had CES going on.
Yeah.
Any great announcements that you can share with us?
I think really where we're going with the edge is really this notion that existed for quite some time was move all your data to the cloud and then go analyze it later. And in fact, I was just talking to a partner, and they were talking about one of their customers, which started off with that notion, and they ended up with, you know, terabytes of data that has never been looked at. So there's no analytics, there's nothing that's been done, and it's like, oh yeah, we're gonna save this data. And they also started to realize, by the way, this is starting to cost us real money as we're storing this data that we're not using. It's like having, you know,
while it's cheaper, it's still costing a lot of money.
It still costs money, and you're not doing anything with it which means it's costing money, it has no value. And so they were talking about the edge and really inferencing on the edge, whether that's based on simple sensors like temperature, humidity, et cetera, where you're taking this data and you're understanding the patterns and kind of saying, okay, I need to go trigger an alarm and only send those alerts and notifications up and save them, but I don't need to go stream it's 72 degrees in this room every 5 seconds to say, yeah, I'm good, I'm good, I'm good. That has no value. But if there is a drop from an average, a moving average, that could be interesting. And again, whether that's that kind of a use case or in a healthcare setting, right? Your resting heart rate and my resting heart rate are probably different. And what is the norm for you and what's the norm for me? And when that goes off a norm, that's when you need some kind of action. So that's one kind of a use case where I think there's going to be more and more of the analytics that's being done on the edge, and we're seeing that today. The other place where I see the edge going is really a lot of these use cases we talked about, retail and retail analytics, where privacy becomes a concern, where you don't want to take all that data, you don't want to stream all the video and save it in the cloud because now you're liable for all that data. Instead, take the metadata as you're capturing it and just save the metadata. And you can take action on that metadata. We talked about the analytics of somebody walking into a store. The metadata is sufficient to help you drive to better business decisions. And then the third really application around the edge is around the autonomous area, right? How do we get all the different types of inputs, the high definition video, whether it's for inspection, autonomous machines, the LiDAR, radar, microphones, how do you go process all of that? And now you're talking about much higher compute requirements to go figure out how am I going to do that? Because you can't move a terabyte of data, in a day over a cellular connection and say, yeah, this makes sense. So again, that's where all that edge processing, inferencing is going to play a pretty key role.
We're almost at the end of our coffee chat. I'm kind of curious, you work with a lot of innovators that come to you with their ideas. Where are you going to innovate with Aero going forward? What's the big things where you see Aero is going to go and really make a difference?
I think we're here to enable our customers, and we sit in the middle of our customers, our suppliers, and our partners. And so the innovation that you're going to see from us is in that area, is how do we make things easier, better, faster, more efficient for all those people together.
So I'm sorry, I got to follow up one more thing.
Yeah.
One of the things I've heard, and I'm more of a software guy, so I'm curious, we talk a lot about agile software development, right? And then it really comes and meets with people that develop hardware, and they tell me you can't be agile with hardware. Is that true?
It is true. And I'll tell you why. I'm a software guy too. I'm an electrical engineer by education and a software engineer by trade. So, and as I came back into the hardware realm and more working with customers, what happens when you try to be agile with hardware is those revisions are pretty complicated. You got to get the hardware right, right? So you can't have the quicker turns. You may have some flexibility in how you do that, but if you get the firmware wrong, right, it's going to take a lot of time and effort to actually get it right in the field, and the impact is pretty significant customer dissatisfaction. And so is there a place maybe within a cycle, but not the classic, we're going to keep iterating like we do in software and just make it available.
My dream of getting more agile across hardware too. We can riff on this a little more at some point in time.
Absolutely.
But our coffee chat is coming to an end. Thank you so much for being my guest. It was
my
great
pleasure. Thanks for
meeting
having me.
you. And with that, if you missed any of today's show, please check out my YouTube channel. You can watch any of today's show or previous shows. And with that, have a good one. Bye.